Kumlen and Ablat Gemara. This is the Mishnah that we've been discussing, or the Rabbi Shua of Yechel ben Broiker, his opinion we've been discussing for the last week or so. And this is finally the Mishnah. In the previous Mishnah, we learned that if somebody decided to give one child a greater portion of the inheritance and another child to diminish their portion, you cannot do that because you're a master mashakasa b'Torah. You're going against what the Torah says, unless you worded it as a gift rather than as an inheritance. But then the Mishnah said if you inserted the word gift, whether you insert it in the beginning, the middle, or the end, it's treated as a gift, even though you also use the word Yerusha, it's generally treated as a gift. And therefore, it's valid. We also had a number of opinions as to how to define that din, and we concluded that even if you are talking to two different people and you're talking about two different deals, and one of them you said, I will gift you, but in the same sentence you said an inheritance, you said these two fields will be gifted and then bequeathed to the following two people, because in the same sentence you use the word inheritance and the word gift, it's as if the entire deal or both deals are a gift and it's valid. We follow Rabbi Yechon's view. We had many views that disagree, but that's Rabbi Yechon's view. So we are up to the Mishnah. If somebody says, Ish ploini yershani b'mokum sheyesh bas, he says that this other party should become the heir instead of my daughter. Had no sons, only daughters. And he said, instead of giving it to my daughter, I will give it to this other person. In the Mishnah. We just began. So a man says, I'm taking this Yerusha and I'm giving it to somebody else. Or the Mokum Sheyesh, or he says, Biti Tisheni b'Mokum Ben. Or he has a son and he says that my daughter should inherit me. Lo yamaklum. Again, you're going against the Torah and it's not valid. Shehisna amashakasa b'Torah. You are trying to contract out of the laws of the Torah and you cannot do that. But it seems from this Mishnah, what happens if you, let's say, have 5 sons, and you said, when all of them are entitled to be heirs, they all are heirs, and you said, I want this particular son to have more than the others, or to have all of it, then it would be valid, which does not agree with the previous Mishnah. Because the previous Mishnah says, if you increase one and you diminish the other, it doesn't work. So it seems that the first part of this Mishnah does not agree with the previous Mishnah. And as all those are rightful heirs, you can maneuver and you can navigate and give more to one and less to the other. Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker says, if you decide to give someone who is entitled to be an heir more than the others, it's valid. But someone who's not a rightful heir, you cannot give it to. It sounds like Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker is saying exactly the same thing as the first part of the Mishnah. So what exactly is going on here? And that's what the Gemara is going to explain. Says the Gemara, at the time it seems the only problem in the beginning of the Mishnah is because you decided to give it to a third party, not one of your direct heirs. Time of the acha b'mokum bas. You decide instead of giving it to your daughter, when she's entitled to no sons, you're giving it to someone else, which is not right. Or ubas b'mokum ben, or you have sons and you decide to give it to your daughter. Ha ben bein habanim. What happened? You only have sons, and you decided to give one son rather than others. Or bas bein habanis. You have a daughter amongst other girls, and there's no sons there, and you decide to give only one daughter. The var of kayamin, then it's valid. That's what the first part of the Mishnah seems to be saying, which is very different than the previous Mishnah. So then tell me how you learn Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker. What's Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker then saying? Amos Sefer. Then the Mishnah continues. Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker says, if he says about someone that is entitled to inherit, the word of kayamin, the words are valid. No, isn't Haina Tanakama, isn't that exactly the same thing you said in the first part of the Mishnah? What's the difference between Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker and the first part of the Mishnah? The Chid Tema, maybe we can say Rabbi Yechel ben Broiker is going even further. Maybe the first part of the Mishnah holds that the Tanakama of this Mishnah holds that only if you give it to someone who's a rightful heir and you decide you have 5 sons, you'll give it to one son rather than the others. Fine. But if you gave it to the daughter instead of the sons, it doesn't work. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka maybe holds that you could even give it to the daughter when you only have sons. Maybe he takes it a step further. As long as she's the next in line, that's good enough. Maybe the chitema, if you are going to argue, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka afilu acha b'makom bas, let's say the next in line instead of the daughter, or bas b'makom ben, or the daughter instead of the son. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka is going a step further. Not only the rightful heirs, but one step further, even someone who's not a rightful heir. But Tanya, we learned in the Braisa clearly, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's son, Rabbi Shmuel said, my father agrees that the next in line, you cannot, then it's considered you're going against the Torah. You're contracting out of the Torah. You can't do that. What is the argument between my father and the Tanakama is al ben habonim bas ben habonis, is only regarding to all of them are rightful heirs, and you decide to give it one rather than others. Tanakama says he cannot do that, and Rebbe says he can. So how are you going to explain ubas ben habonis? Sha'abam, my father says Yiddish that what? That since they're all rightful heirs, you can choose one over the others, and the Chachamim say la Yiddish. So how are we going to learn the first part of our Mishnah? So the previous Mishnah clearly says you cannot change at all the laws of Yerusha. Each child is entitled to an equivalent amount. Fine. The Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says, according to what you're saying now, if we follow his son Rabbi Shmuel, that only amongst the rightful heir you can decide to give one over the others, but not to the next in line. For example, you cannot give it to a daughter if there are sons available. So the first part of the Mishnah that says you cannot give it to the next in line. So we learn from here, but you could give it to one of the heirs. Isn't that the same thing as Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka? So what's the argument between the first part of the Mishnah and Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka? You want to give two answers. Ema. If you want, you can say that our Mishnah doesn't agree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's son. What do you mean? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's son says that my father does not argue Tanakama. Why is he even saying that? Obviously, someone else understood that they are. Miklal the Tanakama, and that's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that I hold, in a way, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, that if they're all rightful heirs, you can give one over the others, but not to the next in line. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka holds that even the next in line, for example, if there are no sons, the daughter will be next in line, then you can give it to that daughter. That's one way of living pshat. So he goes a step further, next in line, but not two down the track. Or Ibai say Makula Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, all Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, v'chsuri mechsatz, missing some words. V'hachi tani, this is how you should learn. If somebody says ish ploini yersheni b'makom sheyesh bas, if somebody says that the next in line, for example, the father's brothers should inherit rather than the daughter, that's going ben, or my daughter should yarshin when there's a son, habas bein habanas. But if, let's say, the only girls and you choose one over the others, or ben bein habanim, you choose one over the others, im amma yiddish kol nechasod dvar. If you say that this one heir should inherit everything, it's valid. Rabbi Yochanan says, if he says about somebody who is suitable to Yarshin, it is valid. In other words, there are no two opinions in the Mishnah. The entire Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, and the Mishnah is just explaining itself. And therefore, this entire Mishnah argues with the previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah says that you cannot tamper at all the laws of Yerusha. You have to follow exactly what the Torah says. And this entire Mishnah followed Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, who says that yes, you can. As long as they're all rightful heirs, you can give it to one over the others. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, halacha like Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. The halacha is followed Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. V'chein amar Rabba halacha ki Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. The halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka that you can give to one child over the others. But, as we're going to see, but the portion that's of b'chayra, you cannot give it to the others. In other words, you can take away the chelik poshet, 5 sons. You can take away from the other 4 sons their portion and give it to one of the sons. But the extra portion that the b'chayra is entitled to, you cannot give it to anybody else. And why is that? Because the Torah says so. There's no logic to it. It's halach l'moshe Messina. Where does the Torah say so? As we'll see in a minute. Amar Rav, in my time, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, it says the pasuk. It says in pasuk, "V'hoya b'yom hinchilus banav," the day that you bequeath to your children. Why does it say the day that you bequeath? He could have just said the day that the children will inherit. What do you mean you will bequeath? It's completely up to you to decide who you will bequeath to. So that's what we learn out of that the father can decide to give one child over the others. Abaye says, what do you mean? I don't need that pasuk. The fact that the Torah says when it comes to a b'choir, you cannot withhold his extra portion. It means to say or imply, but all the rest of the inheritance, you can decide who you give it to and who you won't give it to. So what do I need the pasuk of Yom Hanchilas Bonav? It's clearly the Torah. Only when it comes to the b'choir, you cannot play around with it. Says the Gemara, no. In fact, there's no proof. We need something else. Look at it, Tanya. This is what he says. Why do I need the pasuk leyuchal levakir? Why would you think that you can tamper with the laws of Chayda, that the Torah says you cannot take away from the child who was born from the woman you hate and give it to another child? Why would you think you could? Because the pasuk says, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Berekah, Hoya b'yayim hanchilas bana. It'll be the day that you can inherit to your children, that you're in control of who gets inheritance or doesn't. Shiyach, I would have thought, if you can decide who gets the straightforward inheritance, surely you can decide who will get the extra portion from the b'chayr, or the b'chayr will get it at all. And why is that? Because we learned before already that the b'chayr is I guess the allocation of the b'chayr in a way or his connection to it is much weaker than the rest of the inheritance to all the other children. And where do we see that? Biro kibamuchzik. A b'chayr is not entitled to receive an extra portion by anything which the father did not have in his control when he passed away. Outstanding debts and loans, which we had the whole discussion in the Gemara before, Machlekes Rebbe and Chamim. Things which the father does not have right now in his control, the b'chayr does not get a double portion. But when it comes to the rest of the heirs and the rest of the inheritance, sure they do. It belongs to the father. So what if the father didn't have it yet? They paid off the father a long time later. So what? They still all divided equally. So therefore, the chayr has the weakest connection to the father's estate. So we would have thought that because the chayr has the weakest connection, the father can decide to take it away from the chayr. If you can take away the inheritance from all the rest of the heirs, surely you can take away from the chayr. That's what we would have thought. Shiyach, I would have thought, Baladino, it makes sense. When it comes to an ordinary person, that is that strong. They entitled to things which are only row, which eventually will become to the father, but wasn't there yet, just as if the father already owned it. So yet the father can decide which of his children will inherit, which won't, according to so which is much weaker, his relationship is much more tenuous. He's not entitled to anything which is only below. Like Koshkein, surely that in that case there, what do you call it? The father should have the right to decide, you know what, I'm not giving my b'chayr anything. Talmud Leimer, therefore the Torah has to say, lo yuchal levakir. That's why the Torah has to say, no, you're not permitted to take away from the b'chayr. There's a kasha. Says, but if so the Brisa continues. So the Yomer lo yuchal levakir. So let it just say lo yuchal levakir. Why do you need so why do you need to tell me that the day that you can control? All we need to tell me is that a b'chayr is different. You cannot play around. So we will learn from there automatically. But everyone else, you could tamper with the Yerusha. You can decide who gets what and how much. So you want to know if the Torah did not tell us that you have the right to tamper with the Yerusha, I would have thought if a b'chayr that has such a weak relationship with the assets, and yet the father cannot play around and change that at all, the rules, surely the rest of the Yerusha, where the kids have an automatic right to everything, surely that the father should not have the right to tamper with it or to change it in any way, alter it anyway. So that's why the Torah had to say, but you should know, with the rest of the children, you have the right to do whatever you want. Because I would have thought that's so weak. It does not take in things which are only potential. Yet the Torah says you cannot take, you cannot tamper with the b'chayr, you cannot alter his relationship. Is a pashut, ordinary child. Is much stronger. You can take the row, just like the muh he takes. He's entitled to anything that the father eventually will own, even though right now doesn't own it yet. Like Koshkein, and surely that you should not be able to alter their Yerusha. The Torah gave permission to the father that he can determine, he can decide how much to give. He can decide how much to give. So the more further, so here we have Rebbe says the halacha is like Rabbi Yechel ben Breka. Not that he said the word halacha, he just ruled hoide. He ruled that the halacha is like what do you call it? Rabbi Yechel ben Breka. What's the difference? Mar Savar, no, hoide means he paskin. There's an incident and he paskin Rabbi Yechel ben Breka. Why does one use the expression the halacha and why does one say hoide? Mar Savar halacha difa. One opinion is that using the expression halacha is much stronger than saying that's the halacha. That's the final ruling. But Mar Savar, the other one says no, Maise Ika, because he says when you're learning, as the Rashbam explains so nicely, when you're learning Torah and you say, oh, the halacha is because it's not really the halacha l'maisa, so you don't really go through to the nth degree, and you say, well, it seems I'm inclined to say that's the halacha. But when it comes to a maisa, and you really have to paskin, then you seriously sit down and you look up all the sources and to make a proper determination. You want to do it right. So a maisa is more significant than halacha. Others say no, you cannot, as we'll soon see, you cannot learn from a maisa because maybe your understanding of why the paskin that way is not really your interpretation. We had a few days ago. Rav Papa and Rav Papi had an argument what Rava said, and we concluded Rava said nothing. It was an incident that happened, about the brother who decided to sell he was a b'chor, his share plus his younger brother's share. The brother died, and then the children came and they said he had no right to sell it, and so on. And Rava made a ruling, and each one had a different interpretation from the Maisa. So therefore, was an argument which is better. So Gemara now brings a brisa. Tell them what we learned. Ein lemedin halacha. We don't learn halacha le'mepilim. But if you're learning a sugya, you're learning some subject, and you feel that the subject seems to be saying, or the Gemara seems to be leaning in one direction, you cannot learn a halacha from there. Nor can you learn a halacha. You see a maisa, you can't therefore say that's the ruling, because you might misunderstand. Maybe you don't know all the variables, and maybe you don't understand what the basis of the ruling is. Until you are told halacha lemaisa, until you're told that this is the halacha lemaisa, and you're told exactly what it is. And because you asked the question, you say, look, I have this incident. Tell me what I should do. So then it's clear. If you tell me what to do, I know exactly why you tell me what to do. If you asked the question and they told you, this is the halacha l'maisa, is how you should behave, go ahead and do it. But don't start drawing analogies. What do you mean, my yidma? Well, call it to the kula. I think every halacha is spelled out. That's how it works. You have shilas or chuvas because you compare new circumstances and you try to compare it to other ones. That's how the whole Torah works. He meant was when it comes to treifas, don't say don't say because here the law is this way. A treifa means that certain treifas, 18 treifas that we say the animal is not going to make it, it's not going to live for 12 months, and therefore it renders the animal not kosher. Just because in one part this cut makes a treif doesn't automatically mean in another section of the animal the same thing would make a treif. Example, time we learned, Ein Oimrim B'Treifas Zu Doimel Zu. We don't say by treifas that they're all comparable. Don't be amazed by that. You cut on one side, it dies, and cut on the other side, it lives. As the Gemara says in Chulin that the laws of the liver are exactly opposite of the laws of the lung. And within one of those things, we say as well that there's a big difference. You cut on the top of it, you cut on the bottom of it, even though you make the same incision, the same cut, but here the animal will survive, here won't. So you can't make a medimyonis. In fact, when the Bes Yosef wrote the Shulchan Aruch, there were many, including Maral Prag's brother, Reb Chaim, were many who were against the idea of the Shulchan Aruch. And because people would paskin and start drawing conclusions and drawing similes, when if they don't understand the reasoning behind these psakim, they'll be totally wrong. Because they say a maisa, it can be interpreted in different ways. There is an argument amongst the paskim that today, because we have so many mefarshim on the Shulchan Aruch, who explain the basis for the Shulchan Aruch. So when you learn a chapter of Shulchan Aruch, you not only know the outcomes, you also have a better understanding of where the Shulchan Aruch got this din from and why he got this din from, and the different views, different opinions. So that today maybe it's not the same thing, and you're allowed to paskin. It's not called mipin or Olympia Maisa because you actually understand and you can draw similes because you understand where it's coming from. The same problem with the Rif. When the Rif wrote the Rif, many were against it. He was drawing out the conclusion of every Gemara, first poskim, and there were many against it, including Rabbeinu Ephraim, who felt that he had to go continuously and to argue with the Rif so that people will realize that you have to go back to the Gemara and understand where it's coming from. This is what his motivation was, to argue so that people would come and learn properly, Balamor as well. And the Ramban named his sefer on the Rif, Milchemes Hashem. He felt he was waging a war for Hashem to defend. He always defended the Rif. But those Rishonim who continuously questioned the Rif is because they wanted to make sure that people understood where the Rif was coming from and why he made those rulings, and not just take it as that, because you start drawing similes which are totally baseless. The Gemara continues, if you tell us this is the halacha, is hachi navid maisa, should we follow through and actually behave that way, or you're just telling us in theory? Omar, he said, loita avidu. Because I say that's the halacha, don't follow it. Ad the amina halacha lemaisa, until I actually tell you halacha lemaisa. In fact, in the Kloli HaPaskim, we say that in Mishnah, we don't paskin like Mishnah, we only paskin like Gemara. And even a Mishnah where it says the halacha, even a Mishnah where it says the halacha is like this, Tana Shimon Hatimni, whatever, we have different psukim. We say the halacha regarding, chayave, when the child is considered a mamzer. And Shimon Hatimni holds that only chayave krisis, if you committed adultery or something that sin is karis, that's when the child is a mamzer. And the Mishnah concludes halacha. Nevertheless, we don't paskin that way only because in the Gemara paskins like Shimon Timni. Otherwise, we wouldn't paskin that way. And it says in some of the Rishonim because the Tanaim didn't really spend that much time trying to understand other Tanaim where they're coming from. In the Gemara, that's what they did. They spent all this time to understand the Mishnah, understand the different Tanaim, and therefore when they come to a conclusion, they come to a conclusion. But once Rav Ashi and Ravina concluded the Gemara, nobody can argue with those psukim. In fact, that's why the halacha is like Babli, not like Rishalmi. Even though there's a whole movement now in Israel that because Israel is a largest population, they should completely disregard the Babli and only follow Rishalmi. Actually, a couple of Frum Rabbanim, one from Sydney, who started this whole movement. I forgot his name already. He changed his name. He's in Israel. He has a whole bezin, and where they're trying to change all the psukim to that we should follow the Shalmi and ignore the Bavli. But it says in all the Klal Paskin, we follow the Bavli first of all because Hilchos Kibasroi, Yerushalmi stopped with Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish, which are the first generation of Amoraim, and we continued. Bavli continued for many years later, and also because the Bavli, it says that they all came together and they made a psak. This should be the final psak because he had a kibbutz of Chachamim that came together. It never happened in the Yerushalmi, but the Bavli came, a kibbutz Chachamim came together and they made all this psak, and they all said that these are all the rulings. This is Chasimas, a Talmud, and you cannot argue any further. Even though we do have Rabbanos Svuroi, who sometimes inserted words of the Gemara. In fact, we have it tasted a number of times when in the beginning of Ksuvas, and other places, when it says Rabban, it says Rabachoi, the name Rabachoi. Traces in the beginning of Ksuvas says maybe it's not even Gemara. It might be Rabachoi going to Shiltas, and the question is whether he's from the Goinim, whether he was from Rabbanos Svuroi. But the fact that they're called Rabbanon Sevuroi, which means they're only there to give hesber, they're only there to explain. There's a machlekes in the paskim if Rishonim are permitted to argue with the Goinim, or as far as the Rishonim are concerned, the Goinim are no longer, are just like the Gemara, came a period and ended, and therefore the Rishonim can no longer argue. But yet you see many times in the Rishonim that they argue with Rabbi Hai Goyin and some of the other Goinim, but that itself is an argument. And then further, but the Achreinim are allowed to argue with Rishonim. And the Beis Yosef in his generation are considered like the beginning of the Achreinim, whether they can actually argue with the Rishonim. So but bottom line is that has to be spelled out clearly. Halacha l'maisa. The Gemara continues. Amalu Rav Rav Papa, Rav Huna Rav Yeshua. So Rav said to his two main talmidim, Rav Papa and Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, he also piska de dina, didi lekamaycho. If you see a tshuva of mine, and the chazisa bepircha, and you think it's wrong, you think you have a question for it, like tikru, don't just rip it up and ignore it. Ada sisu lekamay, come before me. If I have a good answer, I will tell you. And if not, I'm not ashamed to tell you. Hadar be, I'll change my mind. Like Rabbi Kivin yesterday sent over there from a number of Amoraim who changed their mind if they realized that maybe they made an error. But if I passed away and then you saw a tshuva of mine, again, lay mikra tikru, don't rip it up. But on the other hand, if you don't think it's right, don't paskin like what it says in there. Loi mikra tikru, and why shouldn't you rip it up? Because maybe it's still Torah and I'm not there. But had I been there, I could have defended myself. But so why can't you just say, look, if our Rebbe said it, even though to us it doesn't seem right, but we should follow because Rebbe said so. No, the ain ledayin elamash ain of rois, that a dayin has to paskin based on what they see. So some of the poskim who want to say that the achareinim are permitted to argue Rishonim, which is the mashal, famous mashal of Bava Kama, where he says that every achar has a right to argue Rishonim. They use this piece here with the ain what Rebbe said to his talmidim. If that's what you think the halacha should be, it doesn't matter that your Rebbe paskin differently. You have to follow what you think. That's the base of what they say. Okay, now starts a new sugya.